in the Q4 2022, I think they mentioned their competitors 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, you'd mentioned.
Welcome to Compound Everything, where we talk money and markets and investing and all that fun stuff.
Yes, and today we're going to talk about Pershing Square.
Yes.
And Bill Ackman.
Yeah, and if you get anything from this video before we start, like and subscribe.
Right.
And comment.
Yes.
Because it helps us out.
So let's talk about what happened. What happened with Bill Ackman? So
he sold his Netflix position, which he only took
back in January.
Right, and he sold it in April 20.
A few days ago, and we're April 25th today.
Yeah.
So he literally held it for like 3 months.
Yeah.
And then got out.
Yeah. So what we did was we read through the most recent Pershing Square letter.
Yeah.
To investors.
Mm-hmm.
I guess Bill Ackman, Ackman wrote it to investors to explain why the sale of Netflix, because I think they lost, was it $400 million?
They lost about $400 million.
Yeah, and they invested $1.1 billion.
Yes,
into
something like that.
Okay, and so he wrote an explanation as to why they decided to sell and take the loss.
Yes.
So we read through that letter, and essentially what we wanted to do is take lessons as investors and people who manage our own money and what we can learn from
his decision.
In the first place, because we also read the first letter that he wrote to investors as to why he took the
so he surprised investors a little bit. I think, like, if you follow Bill Ackman, he's a value investor. He takes pretty concentrated positions in what we would deem value stocks. Mm-hmm. He surprised everyone a little bit when he took the initial Netflix position, because I guess a lot of people wouldn't have viewed Netflix as being a value play at the time. Mm-hmm. And so he took the position back latest January of 2022. And so he wrote a letter actually to shareholders outlining why he bought it. Mm-hmm. And amongst those reasons, he cited, highly recurring revenues, pricing power, economies of scale, substantial margin expansion, an improving free cash flow profile. So these are all things that he liked, and he thought essentially at the time, I think, that Netflix then released that they had slipped a little bit on subscribers, like they weren't gaining as quickly, or I can't remember, did they lose subscribers? I think maybe, I can't recall exactly.
That was the second.
That was most recent.
But they, because we also listened to Netflix.
Their subscriber growth has slowed either way.
Right. Well, and the thing
he thought it was temporary.
I was going to say in the initial when he took his position, if you had listened to the earnings call, which we went back and listened to, they kind of said it was due to COVID, and they were re-navigating the post-COVID lockdowns, and so in his thinking, and I can see this, he probably thought, and of course everything we say is total speculation because we have never once talked to Bill Ackman.
Yeah.
But I think having listened to that, what he would have thought was, okay, the lockdowns are over. People are not spending as much time on TV.
Right.
They'll navigate through this. It's not a big deal. And
that was the management's position at Netflix too on their conference
One
call.
of the execs did say they couldn't totally blame lockdown and COVID.
Sure. Yeah.
He did come out and say, he's like, we can't keep blaming that. So I actually appreciated that. If I was a shareholder, I actually would have appreciated
their candor. Yeah.
But for the most part, they were like, we're learning how to navigate the post-pandemic now and get back to what we were doing pre-pandemic.
For sure.
Yeah.
And Netflix dropped on that news.
Right.
And that's when he decided to act
fairly
decisively.
Yes.
And take a position in Netflix.
Yeah. One of the things going to the first letter as to why he took the position, before we get to the second letter, the first one says Netflix, and this is straight from the letter. This is taken from January 26, 22, and it reads, Netflix's business has highly favorable characteristics which include. And when I read that, and then I read through the points of what they were, I think he got, like, looking back at his decision to invest and then listening to the most recent earnings, and then he sold his entire position. It wasn't even a trim.
Right.
He dropped it entirely. I think he might have got caught up in what Netflix was.
Sure.
And then it dropped, and he got excited like we watched. As I read through all of his points here, I think, was it that he knew he missed Netflix and there was an opportunity, he almost got too excited? And of course, he's a smart guy, so probably not, and he probably didn't foresee the issue with the subs.
Right.
But it's like sometimes you get attached to the ones that got away, and you keep waiting and waiting and waiting for them to drop. And maybe by the time they drop, they're not the same company you were watching when you were wishing that you had gotten into it.
Well, I think in investing, there's obviously financials. So he probably looked at the financials and looked at the subscriber base, et cetera, and thought, wow, actually this makes sense. It's an easy business for him to understand.
It was easy.
It was, at the time at least, he thought fairly predictable, and that will take us as a segue later on to our dissection of his most recent letter. He thought it was very predictable. Easy business, predictable, and
highly recurring revenues.
Highly recurring revenues.
He loves the management.
Right, and based on that, there's all those things. But at the same time, there's also, as an investor, you have to make a story.
Right. One thing, though, in his January letter that he says is that pricing power derived from the enormous value it delivers. And that was weird to me because I would never have thought that Netflix had pricing power. If anything, I want to say for the past 5 years, streaming has been losing pricing power as more competitors come in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got Hulu, you've got Disney Plus, you've got others.
Like TSN, Sportsnet,
yeah. There's lots of other, and I mean, you have limited amount of time to watch TV. So, I guess what people figured was that people are just going to keep adding on services.
And of course, we're reading this letter January 26th after the fact.
Sure.
So we have the benefit of looking back, which is unfair. And what we would have said in this letter on January 26th is probably different than what we're saying today.
Oh, we're not.
That's going from January 26th.
Yeah.
So these are all the reasons he took it. So let's recap. He took it because he liked the highly recurring revenues from the sub-based business. He loved the management.
Yeah. I mean, having watched the conference call, I was reasonably impressed.
And of course, Ackman probably had the benefit of
talking to him.
I don't know if he did or not, but I would not be surprised.
Yeah, I probably did.
Yeah. So where are we? The economies of scale.
Yep.
Okay. He liked the pricing power.
Yep.
He thought he liked substantial margin expansion, the opportunity for continued improvement due to the economies of scale.
Yeah.
And his last point is an improving free cash flow profile, which should allow for continued investments in growth as well as a return of cash to shareholders.
Right.
So those were his January 26 reasons to investors as to why they took a $1.1 billion position into Netflix. Right, so now we're going to fast forward to Q1 2022.
Right, so Netflix essentially came out and said their subscriber base again slowed.
Yeah, not only slowed.
Well, they lost subscribers.
Yeah.
I think to the tune of 200,000, maybe a little bit more with the impact of Russia. And so that, I guess, spooked him.
And with good reason, because when you listen to the Q4 2021 conference call, and then you listened, and so we did it back to back on the same day, so it was, again, we have the benefit of watching in the rear view, right? But then we listened to the Q1 2022, and in the Q4 2021 there was a point where they came out and said something like they didn't really mention their competitors.
Yes.
And they weren't really worried about their competitors. And I think in the Q4 2022, I think they mentioned their competitors 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, you'd mentioned
and different men
we
mentioned it. And we caught it right away. All of a sudden, something happened between Q4 2021 and Q1 2022 where all of a sudden they realized, like, wow, our competitors are in fact that.
We're getting on this.
Their competition.
Right.
Yeah. So that was one difference that maybe Ackman was like, okay, they're like, they're looking at their competitors as competition now. Yeah.
So I'm going to read an excerpt as to why they sold. So the second paragraph of his April 20th, 2022 letter, he says, while we have high regard from Netflix management, the remarkable company they have built in light of enormous operating leverage inherent in the company's business model, changes in the company's future subscriber growth can have an outsized impact on our estimate of intrinsic value. In our analysis, we view the operating leverage favorably due to our long-term growth expectations for the company. And he says, yesterday, in response to continued disappointing subscriber growth, Netflix announced that it would modify its subscription-only model to be more aggressive in going after non-paying customers and to incorporate advertising, an approach that management estimates would take 1 to 2 years to implement. And essentially what he goes on to say is that they don't have the same probabilities anymore that they're going to execute, essentially.
So also after listening to the conference call, not only is he saying that their probabilities have changed, they came out and said their new direction is going to take time to play out.
Right.
Because in the most recent earnings call, they were really focused on the global growth, and they were also very focused on gaming.
Yes.
Those two words kept coming up over and over again. And so I think what Ackman's saying here too, not only the probabilities, but the timing, like we're going to have to wait a long time to see how this plays out and will it in fact be profitable. Yeah. So that was one thing. And he obviously picked that up in from the most recent earnings.
Yeah. Well, Warren Buffett's very famous quote talks about Aesop. His fable about the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Right. So first you have to know, is there two in the bush, and when are you going to get those two in the bush? So those the probability of that changed for Ackman. He said, okay, I'm out. Right. And he made a quick, decisive decision to do that. Right. I think he sold the position all in one day. Right. Ackman did. I mean, and that explains the ridiculous drop part of the ridiculous. I think everyone sold all. Yeah. It was bad. It was really bad. And for anyone who's holding Netflix out there, like Godspeed. Yeah. That's a big drop. Yes, exactly. So that was one thing that you picked up on. Yeah. And that was interesting. And listening to the earnings call, it made a lot of sense. Yes. And as investors, just a side note, if you are interested in companies, listen to their earnings calls. Go absolutely. Back. You can find them. It's easy. Go back and listen to like 3 or 4 earnings calls in a row. See if are they being consistent? Right. Are they admitting mistakes? Are they sticking to their original game plan? Yep. Are they changing it? Are they pivoting? Why are they pivoting if they are? Yeah. Having listened to the earnings call and reading this, we're kind of like piecing together the thought process of Ackman. So we have the time. Yep. Right? That's going to change your return. So the longer the time. Right. Right? Yeah. The lesser the return, the lesser the annualized return. Right. Right? And then the probabilities. And then he says here, there's something else he was looking for. And he says in paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4. So he says, we require a high degree of predictability in the businesses in which we invest due to the highly concentrated nature of our portfolio. So he is literally telling his insurers and telling us as people who like to learn from some of the best, that one of the things that is most important, because he is so concentrated, is that the business has to be predictable. And 3 months ago, that Netflix was predictable in his mind, because they have kind of done the same thing for like however many years. They've been in streaming for a while, and something happened in the next 3 months that no longer made Netflix predictable, or at least as predictable enough for him, given the high concentration of shares he had. Absolutely. Yeah. So that was one high degree of predictability. Did you get anything else from that, from paragraph 4? No. Okay. So the next thing I got from paragraph 4 is it's simple to understand. Right. He literally says, while Netflix business is fundamentally simple to understand, in light of recent events, we have lost confidence in our ability to predict the company's future prospects. So again, probability, because he says they can no longer predict. Right. Predictions are based on probabilities. Right. But he also says the business is fundamentally simple. We like that. We like that. But you don't just need simplicity. You need simplicity with predictability. Right. Right. And there's a lot of businesses that are simple, and yet it's hard to predict. Right. So he's saying like, yeah, it's simple, but now it's not as predictable. And we don't like that. And as an investor, I think that's a good lesson. You want to be in industries, or you want to be invested in companies that are predictable. Predictable. Yep. As predictable as something can be in an unpredictable world. Right. Right? Because you want to jump over 6-inch bars. Yeah, exactly. Not 4-foot ones. No, investing is already hard enough. Right, exactly. Well, one of the things that I took as a lesson from his action, it's not specifically stated in the letter, but was his quick decision. Oh, it is stated in the letter. Oh, maybe it was. Paragraph 5. One of our leanings from past mistakes is to act promptly. There you go. So for sure, he acted quickly. And he acted decisively. Yeah. There was no halfsies. Both times. Both times. So when he jumped in both feet. When he decided to leave, that was it. Yeah. He wasn't like halfway out. Wasn't standing halfway. He was in or out. Yeah. So I think that's another lesson we can take on. Right. The other lesson I gleaned from this is even people who have, let's say, complete information, or as complete as you can gather. What does Lee Lu say? I like accurate and complete information. I was just thinking of him. Yeah. Even they sometimes don't get it all right.
Right. And part of the
And change their mind.
Right. And part of the reason is because business is a living organism.
Sure.
That is what makes it unpredictable. So
Yeah.
it's what he didn't get right might not even have been that he missed something.
Yeah.
It might have been that the company itself moved and morphed, because it almost seems like the management themselves.
Well, they're acknowledging they
missed it.
Yeah, they're acknowledging they have to pivot.
Yeah.
Or change direction. I mean, they were already getting into gaming.
Yeah.
And whatnot, but what does that look like?
The
right?
loss of that's one aspect, but I think the loss of subs really shook the management.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because like I said, in that one conference call,
yeah,
they didn't seem to be too concerned about their competitors.
Right.
And all of a sudden in the next conference call it was our competitors. It was by different management members.
Yeah. Which is interesting.
That's very interesting.
The other thing too is maybe he didn't necessarily get it wrong, although he said the outcomes are less predictable now.
Mm-hmm.
They have less degree of certainty on what those future cash flows are going to be. And he said that because of that, and in light of the fact that he thinks that there's going to be better opportunities in the near future. He said, "We are in the midst of an opportunity-rich environment for Pershing Square due to the dramatic shift in Federal Reserve policy, the highly inflationary environment, geopolitical uncertainty, and the resulting high degree of security price volatility. Therefore, we expect to find a good use for the Netflix proceeds."
Right.
So he says we're cashing out because we think we're going to find something better in the future.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting. So that's the investor's job
think about
at all
this.
times.
He's cashing out at a $400 million loss.
Right. So he basically took a 25% bath.
Right. And he thinks I can actually make back that loss
and then some.
Because he thinks, according to this paragraph, that we are about to enter a buyer's market.
Yeah.
That's essentially what he's saying, that the opportunities for him are going to be so good that I am willing to sell at a 25% loss because these opportunities are going to be so wonderful.
Because he wants to have dry powder in the
for
cave.
Pershing Square to put their money in. And that, to me, was like, okay.
Right.
So for the lesson I took for that is that we need to have money.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah,
and then the second lesson is sometimes selling at a loss is your best opportunity, because are you going to keep holding it, waiting for it to come back, especially in an environment where it's not predictable? It might take years, because that is a lost opportunity. And what he's saying here is, I don't want to take that lost opportunity. I want to have money now because the opportunities might be really good.
Well, what he's saying essentially is, I owe it to my investors to find the best possible opportunities and put their money there.
Yeah.
And what he's saying is, I thought it was Netflix, but now I'm thinking it's not. I'm going to go find a better one.
Yeah, that's totally perfect.
Yeah.
So there's one more thing that you learned about because of the two letters and just the whole business that Netflix is, and that was operational leverage.
Operating leverage,
yeah.
So essentially...
So why don't you talk about that for a bit?
Sure. So essentially what he said is part of the reason he liked Netflix is because they had what he calls enormous operating leverage. But that can be a bit of a double-edged sword. So operating leverage is essentially the way that the business's fixed costs align with their variable costs. So fixed costs are those things that the business has to pay for, irrespective of whether they sell a single product. So Netflix, in their business, they now have to make content, right? So there's going to be a fixed cost to making the content. Okay. Whereas their variable costs are other things that will depend on, they'll escalate as with their subscribers. Right. So the more sales they make, the more those costs go up. So the variable costs can go up or down with revenue. So one of the things he liked is that there's a specific break-even point with a let's say a business that has high operating leverage. And once you pass that break-even point, every amount of money you make over top of that is, I don't want to say gravy, but the opportunity is large. Right. Once you get past the thing. What he was saying there is, one of the things he liked was that they have these fixed costs, yes, but if they can continue to increase their subscriber base, they're going to make an enormous amount of money.
And so the negative to that, what he didn't like, was if they're losing their subscriber base, their fixed costs stay the same.
So the way that works with operating leverage is they still have those costs they have to pay. They still have to make content. They still have all their fixed costs. So if they're losing subscribers, that it serves almost like a double-edged sword.
Right.
Because
To the negative.
To the negative, right? If you have high operating leverage, it actually serves as a killer of,
Right.
of
And so obviously Ackman knew that because he mentions that and
Right.
he didn't like that.
yes.
And it wasn't predictable. So
Right.
why don't we wrap up? We actually, surprisingly enough, this letter is very quick to read.
Yeah.
You can read it in a couple minutes. And we took away a lot between the two letters,
Yes.
but specifically a lot from the second letter. So the first lesson I learned is that he likes predictability.
Yep.
He acts promptly.
Yep.
If he sees a better opportunity, he's not afraid to sell another opportunity that is not as advantageous for his investors.
Yep.
And he really cares. One thing we didn't talk about, he really likes the management.
Yes.
He mentioned
That
the
was the other
management
thing.
twice. The only thing is the management, no matter how great they are, the simplicity and the predictability outweigh the wonderful management.
Yes. The things I took away, very similar, obviously. Management was one thing that that stuck out to me. The biggest thing I took was that he was willing to reverse course. And reverse course, and when he did it quickly.
And even at a loss. He
Yeah,
wasn't
even
going to
at a
sit
loss.
around and wait to make back his money.
I can't think of how many times the stock's gone against me and a story's changed and I just kind of sat on it.
Too much.
Those are the biggest things that I took away from it. And the other thing is, again, the simplicity. He looks for simplicity and predictability of a business.
Yeah.
So those are the takeaways I took. I think we'd be interested to see if any of our subscribers have any of their own thoughts.
Yeah.
So if you have any of your thoughts that you read this letter and you take things away from it, let us know.
Yeah, definitely. That'll wrap up what we have to say. But if you have any thoughts on Bill Ackman or Netflix or his position in Netflix or anything like that, let us know in the comments.
Yeah.
And if you found any value in this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks.
Thanks.